I'm going to be using this throughout because it's hot. I want to wear this shirt, and actual fan noise is gonna ruin the video, so you know, happy Pride. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Helen, and today we are going to talk about reading. For those of you who may not know, I did the reading rush last year. All those videos are on my second channel, go check those out. But it did reignite my love of reading for a bit, and it petered off in the fall, but around Christmas time, I had a super long list of things I wanted to get. Well, now I have them. So, as you can tell by the thumbnail. So today, since it's right after July 1st, 2021, I thought now would be a good time to check in with what I've been reading this year so far in the first 6 months. Before we begin though, I'd just like to remind you to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when I upload new videos, especially because my schedule isn't really set in stone at the moment. That'd be great. I also want to let you guys know that I am now a Eurovision blogger, a Eurovision journalist, if you will. I have joined the team over at That Eurovision site. It's been a lot of fun so far. The podcast should be starting up really, really soon, and hopefully yours truly may be on it at some point, but I am doing a fair bit of writing over there, so you can check out everyone's work over at That Eurovision site. As of course it's summer, Eurovision is a little bit quiet, but there's stuff happening right now, like maybe we might have a host city in the next couple months. Anyways, be sure to go check them out, follow them on social media. I will put all the links in the description below. And yes, let us get started, shall we? I have been keeping track of what I've been reading through Storygraph, which I found out about around January-ish time, so I'm going off of what I've logged then. It's been really helpful to keep track of what I've been reading and what types of things I've been reading, which is nice. I'm not really up to change anything yet or branch out because I still have a whole list of things I want to read, but for the most part I've been kind of sticking to that. So the first 6 books on this list are actually the Molly American Girl book series. I am someone who was born in 1995, so of course I grew up with American Girl, and Molly was just my favorite. I have the Molly doll in my parents' house with a million outfits in a wardrobe that my dad built for her, so you know, I'll get those over here at some point. But I had a hankering to read some of the American Girls books, especially after I started listening to the American Girls podcast, which is great, by the way. You should absolutely listen to it. And a lovely soul on eBay just happened to have the original 6-book series of Molly, which I was kind of lucky to come across because Molly has been archived, which means her books aren't really out right now, so this is an older copy, but I'm pleased with this, and it's really interesting to go back and read these now because I see a lot of myself in this character as a 9-year-old. But yeah, so technically I read the first 2 in December and then the rest of them in January, but we're gonna count this as one read, and it was nice to go back to it. Next up, we have A Brief History of the Walt Disney Company by Brian J. Robb. This is a very fascinating look at the history of Walt Disney Animation, both while Walt was alive and then leading up to today. And by today I mean probably around 2013, 2014 time, before it became the behemoth of Marvel and Star Wars that it is now. And I quite liked it. I'm hit or miss with the Disney company, especially with its output right now in terms of not original things, but I think it's really fascinating, and it doesn't pull any punches. It doesn't glorify Walt like a lot of people would. Otherwise, it takes a bit of a skeptical eye to the Disney company, which I appreciate, but also recognizes what they did for animation. So yeah. The next couple books I'm going to talk about are library books because in January I didn't have a lot of money to spend on books. The first book is called Sharp, The Women Who Made an Art Out of Having an Opinion by Michelle Dean. It's a very brief history of prominent female critics, not necessarily movie critics, although she does talk about Pauline Kael for a bit, but she also talks about people like Dorothy Parker, Hannah Arendt, Susan Sontag, and the like. And Nora Ephron, which I appreciated. So it's very interesting to hear how these women's careers both progressed and how they all interacted with each other. It kind of goes chronologically from the beginning of the 20th century up until I think the late 1990s, but it's a very cool read if you haven't checked it out yet. The other library book that I read right after that was Michelle Obama's Becoming. Finally, I quite enjoyed it. There's a lot there about just what it was like for her to be on the campaign trail, and the fact that for a lot of people in the media, she had to be perfect. She had so much pressure on her as a Black woman, and like no missteps, and trying to avoid the stereotypes, and it's a very fine tightrope. And I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed learning more about her personal journey. Back on to books that I currently own. I pre-ordered this one about 3 or 4 months before it came out. This is Women vs. Hollywood, The Fall and Rise of Women in Film by Helen O'Hara. It came out in February. Helen O'Hara is a critic with Empire, and I follow her on Twitter. She's amazing. I, in case you can't tell by everything that I've put on my channel thus far, am a big film nerd and a big nerd about women in film in particular. And this was just a fascinating look at especially how women were so prominent in film in the early 20th century, and then as soon as like it became a profitable business, then the men came and kicked them all out, and a lot of these movies are lost. And it's charting just the journey over the last century and how we have so far to go still in terms of representation and making sure that it's a safe environment to work in as well, but also told with a very funny and insightful voice. So if you like Helen O'Hara's Twitter, definitely check this out. It's the same thing. On to the next Women in Film volume. I have Political Animals, The New Feminist Cinema by Sophie Meyer. I had picked this up a while ago, and I think I had started reading it and kind of put it down. This is very good. I just don't know if it's great as a light read, which is what I was kind of looking for when I picked this up. I did make it through with the help of listening to music along the way. But it does highlight a lot of international women filmmakers, which is something that a lot of, I think, women in film books don't tend to do. Well, you know, there's few women in film books, but the ones that exist don't tend to do that. But yeah, if you're looking for a more global approach to studying feminist cinema and women in film, definitely check this out. More of a breeze, please. Next up is one that I had been eyeing for a while and just recently finally picked up, was 21st Century Musicals from Stage to Screen. This is edited by George Vadasthenas. It has a few different authors in there, but basically it's a series of essays on musical films from the 21st century. It's got things like Hedwig and the Angry Inch, In Chicago, Phantom of the Opera, Rent, The Producers, Dreamgirls, Hairspray, Mamma Mia, 9, Jersey Boys, which was a really interesting article, Sweeney Todd and Into the Woods, The Last 5 Years, Annie. We talked very briefly about the 1999 version, which is the best version, and it's a movie called London Road, which I hadn't heard of. And it's basically talking about how it translated from stage to screen and how these movies may have failed or succeeded along the way. So certainly some new perspectives that I hadn't picked up on, and I do love movie musicals. The first movie I saw back in cinemas a couple weeks ago was In the Heights. So because this was published around 2016, it doesn't include things like the Hamilton live on tape or Cats. And of course In the Heights. But I would like a new edition of this to have those 3 big hitters in there, and how they differ and whatnot, because I think they also have important things to say. But yes, if you're into musicals and you're into movie musicals specifically, pick this one up. All right, we're getting there, I promise. Next up on the list is The Soul of Power by Callie Bates. Now, you might remember from my reading rush last year that I read The Memory of Fire, which is book 2 in this trilogy. This is book 3. I have The Waking Land sitting somewhere in my bedroom back in the US. I don't know how I feel about this. It's an easy read, that's for sure. I like some of the power structure in here. I don't know if I liked the main character. What this series does is having a different protagonist of a trio for each book. So in the first one it was Alana, and the second one was Jahan, and this one is Sophie. Of the 3 protagonists, I find her the least compelling, but I do think she's still quite well written. I would recommend this trilogy as a whole. If you're looking for something a bit different fantasy-wise, it's very nature-based, which is pretty cool. So yeah, check that one out. I don't know if I'm allowed to share this one, but I've had this on my shelf for ages. I used to work at a bookstore, and through that, we got ARC copies, advanced reader copies of books, and one of those was Connor Frantis' note to self. So I've just had this here forever, and we were allowed to keep the arcs, don't worry. This one was interesting because, as he said when he was writing it and it was coming out, it was more abstract than the book he had put out before, Work in Progress. That was more narrative based. So this one is very more abstract. It's much more about poetry, some essays, some photography. But the thing about this is that it is an unfinished copy, so like the words are mostly there, but a lot of the pictures aren't necessarily. So maybe in the future I'll pick up the real version. It is a little bit serendipitous that I'm talking about this when he just announced a new book coming out later called House Fires. I'll definitely be picking that up. I've enjoyed Connor Frantis on YouTube for a while. Maybe it's the Midwesternness in me. Different type of YouTuber book, which I really appreciate, and very honest and raw. So yeah, good. Next up is a book that I actually bought all the way back in like 2017 on a visit to the UK, and that is Room by Emma Donoghue. That is, of course, the basis for the movie of the same name starring Brie Larson and Jacob Tremblay. I actually read the script for the film, which Emma Donoghue also wrote, as part of my class before I sat down and read this all the way through. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the 5-year-old as the narrator. It is a harsh read at points, just thinking of the things that were done to this person. I guess if you're a fan of true crime, even though this is fiction, I feel like you would like this. And I do think Emma Donoghue has a great voice, but I think I prefer the film adaptation as opposed to the book. But she also wrote the film, so, you know, good on her. So the next book that I read was Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Edelage. This is a really important read, particularly for anyone who doesn't quite know the history of racism in the UK. It's certainly something that I wasn't aware of. We get told about what's happening in the US quite a bit in the history there, but I do think it's important, especially if you are British, to pick this up and read about what's happening in your own country, because it's something I certainly wouldn't have picked up on, something that my husband probably wouldn't have picked up on. And I know this comes across as like, you know, the white person being like, please read this book. Read it, but then also make sure that your self-education on these subjects doesn't stop there, and make sure that you seek out all the resources that Rennie points out in the book, and also on your own. It is not the responsibility of Black people to teach you about the history of racism in your country. You need to do that for yourself, and also listen to people when they are telling you their stories. So that's what I have to say on that. Other than that, very good read, very tough read subject-wise, but it's worth it. So the next one might not come as any surprise given the show that just came out, but I did pick up the first volume of Shadow and Bone while I was watching the series, which is interesting. So the series takes this book as well as the first book in the Six of Crows duology and kind of combines the characters in them. So I was watching the show and quite enjoying all the characters, and this solely focuses on Alina's storyline. And I have to say, I did find the show a bit more compelling. I do find the Six of Crows characters to be a little bit more compelling than Alina's arc, even though she's the main character and she is the Sun Summoner. But I do appreciate some of the influence of 19th and early 20th century Russia, and that aesthetic is something that I don't think we see a lot in fantasy fiction, which I appreciate. At some point I'll probably have to pick up the Six of Crows, but at this point I think I'm content with leaving the books be for now and waiting for season 2 of the show to come out, since it's been confirmed. As a side note, I initially started watching the show because Ben Barnes is in it, and yeah, been my crush since I was 13 years old. For Prince Caspian to now, I just had to pick it up, you know? After Shadow and Bone, I picked up You Will Get Through This Night by Daniel Howell. This just came out. This one, unlike a lot of the other books in this list, it took me a while to get through this. And not because it was bad. It's actually very, very good. But just, how do I put this? As someone who is currently trying to manage their mental health right now, I did find it very useful, and I wanted to make sure I was taking in a lot of the advice from this book while I was reading it, which of course meant that I read it a bit slower. And I think it took about 2 or 3 weeks, whereas something like Soul of Power, Shadow and Bone, I could knock out within like a week or so. Especially because my general rule is I tried to read a chapter a day unless I have a bit more time on my hands. I really recommend this, especially if you are struggling with your mental health. This is, as he says in the beginning of the book, this is not a replacement for talking therapy, seeing a therapist, or getting on medication to help your anxiety and depression and whatnot, but this is a good start, and they do list a lot of resources, and this was written in consultation with a clinical psychologist. So it's a good resource, but you should definitely use this as a jumping off point to seeking other treatment. So, but yeah, definitely recommend this. And I have to say, I'm just, on a side note, so proud of Dan and all he's been able to do over the past few years, and coming out of the closet and, you know, being able to be himself, but also take a step back from the internet and kind of live his own life. So very proud of you, Dan. Good job. And the last book that I've completed, I just completed it a couple weeks ago, and I was like, do I include this? Because I finished it in July, but I did start it in June. So this was my birthday present from my husband this year, and that is Over the Top by Jonathan Van Ness. As a side note, I do need a new season of Queer Eye very soon. I understand that it's difficult to do with pandemic and whatnot, but there is so much that I did not know about JVN's story and all the struggles that he went to, and especially in the latter half of the book, it is quite tough to read because he went through a lot in terms of just abuse and addiction, and the fact that he was able to come out on the other side of that is just so inspiring. Definitely read this. He still tells it in his wonderful, funny voice. I can hear his voice while I'm reading it. And I love that he substitutes names with names of Russian gymnasts because, like JVN, I'm super into gymnastics and figure skating and am not very good at either, but I enjoy watching it. So, you know, can't wait for his commentary during the Olympics in a couple weeks. And that is everything that I have completed reading. I'll give you a quick look at what I'm currently reading and a couple things I have on my horizon. So what I am currently reading, I have two things actually. Loss, which is a short story compilation edited by Victoria Hislop. It's all women authors and essays that kind of fall around this subject. This is something that I've been reading on and off for the last like 3 or 4 months or so. I usually like pick up a short story from this as kind of a palate cleanser between books. If I don't feel ready to take on like a whole book on its own, I can just get through this. As of right now, I think I'm about almost halfway through, but this one will probably be on my currently reading for a while. And then what I am currently voraciously reading right now, I just started it, is Larger Than Life, A History of Boy Bands from NKOTB to BTS. The title is a little bit misleading because it talks about the history of boy bands prior to the 90s as well. But this is by Maria Sherman, and I feel so validated as someone who is a big Jonas Brothers and especially a One Direction stan, especially if you followed my Twitter anytime between 2012 and 2016. This is a volume that I so wish that I had like 4 or 5 years ago when people were like giving me crap for being like, that's not art, blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, oh my gosh, I love this. This person, this author, is me. How does she know like what I'm thinking? I can't wait to finish this. I need to read the rest of it. I'm so excited. This is cater-made for me. I'm so ready. Finally, here are 2 books that I've bought that I haven't had a chance to read yet, just priority-wise. Worth Dying For, The Power and Politics of Flags by Tim Marshall. As you can see, it has a bookmark in it. That's because my husband's reading it at the moment. I'm a big geography nerd and a flag nerd, and you know, politics and whatnot. You know, I watch Eurovision. So this I'm getting excited to read once Tim is done with it. I do have Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. This one is written by Kristen Kobes-Dumez, who is a professor at Calvin University, which is my alma mater. I've talked about that previously. I have mixed feelings about publications coming out of my alma mater, but I'm super excited to read this. I've read some of her previous research on the subject, and I think that this is going to be really interesting, especially trying to trace like basically how we got here in terms of the whole Trump thing. I definitely know a lot of people who have confused nationalism with being a good Christian, so this should be interesting. That is all of the books that I have read in 2021, am currently reading into right now, or plan to read probably before the summer is out. And rest assured, I have a lot of other things on my TBR that I just don't have yet, and I don't feel like going into it. Again, I keep track of everything I read on the story graph, so you can go find me there. I can't remember what my username is, but I'm sure if you type in Helen Grotehuis, you'll find me. Another place you can find me, again, is over at That Eurovision site, which is at That Euro site on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the social medias. Please go check us out. We're trying to get a little bit more traction and cover the Eurovision subjects that you want to hear about. And as I say, the podcast is starting soon, so now is the perfect time to go check that out and support us all. We really appreciate it. As for me personally, you can subscribe here on my main channel, subscribe on my second channel. I don't know what I'll be doing over there, but it's good to, you know, be there just in case. You can follow me on Twitter at HelenMarie95, on Instagram at HelenMarie_95, at Facebook.com/HelenGrotehuisWriter, and also on my website, Helen-Grotehuis.com. All of those links will be in the description below. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with my Patreon at the moment. I might make some of the exclusive content public. We'll see, no promises. I just thought I'd make a little video about what I've been reading, because I'm reading a lot more and I'm so glad that I am. Especially because that is the one time of day where I turn off all my electronics, tune out the world, and just have some time to myself. Let me know in the comments what you guys have been reading this year. Is there anything that I should check out that you really like? As always, thank you very much for watching. Remember to keep living awesome lives, and I will see you all soon. Bye.